So to this issue of sort of identifying innovation and to the question of how innovation happens, and it's often tied up in eligibility issues, recommendations or ideas about what government's role should be with respect to social innovation. And yet there are these little micro nuggets out there that that government should seek out. And then there's another thought that government's strength lies in a capacity to facilitate scale, and so it ought to orient itself that way. So just thoughts about sort of how government should touch on it.
I guess on innovation, I think that, in some cases what we did both at the federal level and then what we also did at the municipal level when I worked in the Bloomberg administration was kind of make that beautiful political decision, which was try to do both. That's what we did on both. I think what happened for the first time, you saw government giving out major planning grants they hadn't before because they realized that certain communities were not underrepresented, not on the map at all. And if this was supposed to be something that galvanized all of America, how could you ignore Alabama, right? As an example. We noticed that you can have a charismatic president, whatever party they're in, but at the end of the day, if you do not have a relationship with a governor, you can't get anything done in that state. No matter how much you think you can do direct granting to a place.
Why?
Because so much of the oversight has to happen through the state. It's just the way that the laws are made. And so at the end of the day, when AmeriCorps had to grow in its sophistication, it built a governor's council that ultimately made a difference in actually expanding the program much further. So I think that's where some of the innovation, and I guess probably the last thing is when you have to make the decision not to fund someone. People don't like to be in the business of no, but being in the business of no is critical. And so.
And are you alluding to sort of political pressure that comes back from saying no?
Of course.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And anyone who works in the private sector as well. Yeah. Anyone who works in philanthropy will feel that pressure as well too. If a board member brings something to them, doesn't mean that they have to say yes.
Yeah.
But I think that there are ways that you can still think through innovation. It just includes more players, more agendas than you anticipated, and that government works fastest when it's preventing, not starting something. And so you kind of have to think about your timeline a little bit differently.
Just to pick up on that point, it's really from the point of view of just trying to do something in partnership with a single government agency to potentially change one practice that they have engaged in historically. It's really, really hard to do. And you have a culture in government and in many of these agencies of people who have done these jobs for many, many years. I mean, remember when, Obama gets elected, he appoints the Secretary of Education, who appoints, well, that's a bad one because that's sort of non-specific down, but he appoints the highest level and heads roll maybe a level or two below, and everybody else who's done that job stays in their job and wants to do it the same way that they've always done it, despite the fact that the folks up above have changed. And so when you think about what does that translate into when you're trying to change the way a government entity does its work, which is a somewhat different perspective, right, than thinking about sort of the not-for-profit, the social, the innovators. I'm talking about within government doing that kind of innovation. I just tell you this one story. I did a project many years ago when we still had an Immigration and Naturalization Service. And we were actually trying to play with the idea whether the then INS could effectively release people who were in deportation proceedings. So the background is, historically, if you are not in custody and you get ordered deported, you never leave the country. Why would you? Nobody comes after you. And everybody is held that they get their hands on, and everybody they don't get their hands on isn't held. So it's rather random whether you wind up deported or not. And so we were playing with this question of whether there was a supervised release possibility for the INS. So I spent a lot of time at an INS jail here in New York, which was down on Varick Street at the time. Well, it didn't matter whether I had relationships, and I did, with the highest levels of the INS. Those people who ran that jail, they didn't know what the hell to do with me. They didn't know why I was coming there every day. Who was I? What was I doing? Asking questions, looking at files. They were so annoyed by me. So how did I get my work done? Donuts.
Yeah,
I brought donuts every single time I went, and I changed them up. Different flavors, different kinds, from different places. And I got everything I ever wanted. And I had access everywhere. I practically had keys to the place by the end. But that's how hard the work is on the ground level, to think about changing a system that is massive. And so you're working down on the bottom, and you're working up at the top, and do the two ever meet in an effective, efficient innovation that can last? If you're lucky, yes.
Meryl's talking specifically also about government, when government runs programs, and my sense is America's Forward's orientation is more about how does government identify others who are delivering innovative solutions and support that.
So America Forward is really about a new vision for a role of government, the role of philanthropy, and the role of the nonprofit sector. And the fundamental idea is that we need all of these things working together in a really aligned way to drive change. And so the America Forward agenda, and I believe some or all of you have read parts of the briefing book, and that's all still what we think, but it's probably 2.5 or 3 years old now, and so we've really advanced a lot of the specific policy ideas, which I've brought for you. But the things that we've landed on that we think could really make a difference are a handful of key initiatives. One would be the creation of an Office of Social Innovation, potentially at the level of the White House. It would actually, and in some ways ironically, be charged with doing something not altogether different from what the Faith-Based Initiative did, which is going around looking at how every department and agency is run and is or is not open to entrepreneurship and innovation, performance and competition, and making a set of recommendations about how those things could be enhanced in the agency operations. This office could also shine a spotlight on social innovation and entrepreneurship, could run conferences, it could do a whole bunch of things that elevate the issue and bring the frameworks and the language and examples into public consciousness more broadly. We also think that it would be extremely powerful to have a social innovation fund or a network of social innovation funds. Some of it actually is the way AmeriCorps worked, where there would be a philanthropic match required, as well as a match by the ultimate beneficiaries. And the idea here is that if we could demonstrate a fund that was government dollars, that was organized on the principles of identifying and growing what works, and we could prove that it's possible to do this in some defined area in a relatively small scale experiment in the hundreds of millions of dollars, not in the billions of dollars, that we may be able to begin to move the dial. It's a little action tank experiment within government. That idea has significant traction. There are absolutely no commitments, and I would never want to represent that there have been on the part of the transition team, but there are a lot of people who think it's a really interesting idea, and there are a set of philanthropic players at high levels who are willing to put up the match right up front. So we might see something like an announcement of a $500 million social innovation fund in the next few months even. That would be an opportunity for either local communities or coalitions or issue-based coalitions to come together to tap these resources, create a match, and bring a specific set of innovations to bear on a problem. The third big area that we've thought about that could be valuable would be something like a social entrepreneurship agency, something maybe like the SBA, but for nonprofits. I mean, with a particular focus on entrepreneurship and innovation, but not limited to that. So it could potentially affect the nonprofit sector more broadly. Right now, or at least thus far in recent years, it's been the fastest growing sector. Certainly the current state of the economy will have an impact on it at the same moment that social needs will grow. And there is no agency in government right now that is really charged with understanding and supporting the effectiveness of nonprofits. Not just sort of the rules of the game, but really what is the capacity of the sector? How do we enhance it? How do we channel more resources to building capacity? both for sort of national brands, but also the much more community-based local operations. All of those ideas currently have traction, and so you could imagine if they were implemented, and of course the devil is in the details, but if they were well implemented, you might be able to see some shifts that enabled both the bottom up and the top down to meet in the middle. That's the big hope.